Today, we're going to dive into the incredible story of a time when two bitter enemies sat down to try and stop the world from ending. It's all about containing a monster they both helped create.
So let me start with a pretty terrifying question. What if the world could end in the next 30 minutes? During a period called the Cold War, this wasn't some movie plot. It was a daily reality for millions of people. 30 minutes. That was all it would take for a nuclear missile to get from one superpower to the other.
So what caused this constant state of alert? Well, it was something called the arms race. After World War II, the USA and the Soviet Union got locked into this really tense competition. But it wasn't on a battlefield. It was in their factories and labs, with each side trying to build bigger and better nuclear weapons than the other.
The logic seemed simple, right? If you have more weapons, no one's going to dare attack you. But in reality, as each side built more, the other side just felt more threatened and built even more in response. It created this terrifying loop that put the entire planet on edge.
And just look at that number, over 60,000. By the late 1960s, the two superpowers had a combined nuclear arsenal of that size. That was enough firepower to destroy every single major city on Earth many, many times over. The whole situation was just spiraling out of control. Something had to change.
And that change began with a pretty radical idea. For the very first time, these two huge rivals decided that maybe, just maybe, talking was better than endlessly building weapons. This was the start of the Strategic Arms Limitation Talks, or, as everyone came to know it, SALT. Now, to really get what they were talking about, you need to know what this is. A strategic ballistic missile is basically a giant, long-distance rocket carrying a nuclear bomb. These were the main weapons they were trying to control, because these were the things that could end the world in minutes.
Okay, this is where the logic gets kinda weird. A key part of the treaty wasn't just about limiting the missiles themselves, but about limiting missile defenses, the shields designed to shoot down incoming attacks. How on earth could having fewer shields make you safer?
While this chart really shows the bizarre logic of nuclear strategy. Think about it. If one side built a perfect defense shield, they might be tempted to launch a surprise attack, thinking they couldn't be hit back. But if both sides were completely vulnerable, neither would ever risk starting a war in the first place.
And this terrifying concept was given a perfectly fitting acronym, MAD, for Mutual Assured Destruction. The peace was literally kept by a grim promise. If you attack us, we will attack you, and we will both be wiped off the face of the earth. It's a scary, scary way to prevent a war, but for decades, it actually worked.
So, in 1972, they signed the SALT I Treaty. It did two main things. First, it froze the number of long-range missile launchers each side could have. And second, it severely limited those missile defense systems, basically locking in the logic of MAD. It was a truly historic moment.
But SALT, I wasn't perfect, not by a long shot. It had a huge loophole that clever engineers were already taking advantage of. The monster of the arms race hadn't been contained, it was just changing its shape. And that meant a second round of talks, SALT II, was urgently needed. So here was the problem. SALT, I limited the number of missile launchers, the silos and submarines. But what it didn't limit was the number of bombs or warheads that each missile could carry. New tech allowed one missile to carry multiple warheads, each one able to hit a different city. So while the number of missiles was frozen, the number of actual bombs was just skyrocketing.
So the goal of SALT II was much, much bigger. It aimed to set an equal cap on the total number of strategic weapons for each side. That includes all the land-based missiles, submarine missiles, and the heavy bombers that could carry nuclear bombs. The magic number they agreed on was 2,400 each.
This all sounded great on paper, but it raised a huge question. How could two bitter enemies possibly trust each other to follow the rules? How could the US be sure the Soviets weren't secretly building more weapons? And how could the Soviets be sure the US wasn't?
On-the-ground inspections were a total non-starter. There was no way either side was going to let enemy inspectors poke around their most secret military bases. So they needed a way to check on each other without ever having to meet face-to-face.
And the answer they came up with was straight out of a spy movie. They would use satellites to watch each other from orbit. They called this system National Technical Means of Verification. Basically, it was a three-step process. 1. Spy satellites would constantly take super high-resolution photos of military sites. 2. Experts would pore over these images to count missile silos and bombers. And 3.
And this is the most amazing part. Both sides actually agreed not to hide their weapons or interfere with the other satellites. In a really brilliant move, they turned spying into a tool for peace. So after years of hard work, the treaty was finally signed in June 1979. It looked like a huge success. But then, just 6 months later, the Soviet Union invaded Afghanistan. That act completely destroyed the fragile trust between the two countries. In response, the US president pulled the treaty, and it was never officially approved by the government.
So you might be thinking, if the second treaty technically failed, why are we even still talking about it? Well, because even with that failure, the SALT process fundamentally changed the world and left behind a really powerful legacy. You see, the SALT talks created a kind of blueprint for the future. First, they proved that even sworn enemies could find common ground when they're facing a threat to the entire planet. Second, that clever idea of using spy satellites to verify the deal, that became the standard for all future arms control treaties. And most importantly, SALT opened the door for later agreements that didn't just limit weapons, but actually started reducing their number. The story of SALT isn't just history. It's a real lesson for today. It shows that even when trust seems completely impossible, communication and clever ways of checking promises can solve our planet's biggest challenges. It proves that even when you're facing total destruction, talking is always, always better than fighting.